welcome to Talk of the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, well, we bring you politics, a very special show in post-primary mode here, post-preliminary mode. Tonight, very special guest joining us, one of the finalists in this year's mayoral election, City Councilor at Large, John Connolly, joins us to talk about the road ahead to the final and how does he get to victory on November 5th, Election Day. Then in the second half, we'll stay with mayoral politics. Joining us, prominent African-American political activist Joyce Ferriabough, and talk about what's next for her candidate, Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, and what about the community at large. None of the candidates of color finished in the top two. Who do they vote for? All that and more tonight on Talking the Neighborhood. All right, we're back with Talking the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, post-preliminary politics. And of course, like everyone else, we were glued to our own set and other sets watching the finals, the preliminary results that came in last Tuesday, and looking to see who would make the finals. And the prognosticators, I don't think anybody should have been surprised who finished. The man who'd been first in the polls through much of the campaign and the guy who was second. They reversed positions a little bit, but tonight, joining me, City Councilor at Large John Connolly, who finished in the money and is here tonight the first week after he achieved a second place finish. And John, congratulations.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on,
We were talking before the show about, you stood up very early on before Mayor Menino even announced.
I think I was here in February. And,
that's right. Before he even said he wasn't running, and look where it got you. And, and let's talk a little bit about that because, of course, in the polls you were. It was very tight, clearly, and there weren't a lot of polls, but it showed you in the lead throughout. Now, you ended up finishing second, which I guess is all that matters because you made the final, but a little disappointing. Did you think you were going to run better in that field?
Thrilled to make the final and happy with second, just as happy as I would have been in first. Just to make the final was what mattered. And I didn't put a lot of stock in the polls. I felt good going into Election Day. I felt like we had momentum, but we had a high undecided. And we haven't done this race in 20 years, arguably 30, so I didn't put any stock in the polls. What I'm proud of are two pieces. One, we had votes across the entire city. And I think we had first place in 7 neighborhoods, but we had strong votes across every neighborhood. I'm really proud of that. But the second piece is the reason why, the message. And I think that's what mattered.
And you weren't sure, I know you believe strongly, you were talking about the schools for many years, about whether it would resonate, but no fear that you're sliding a little bit because you were, like I said, the polls showed you in the front, but
I think the polls,
you end up finishing second.
Again, I don't put much stock in them, but I think our ultimate final number was ahead of any number I had polled at. So we were happy about that, a higher percentage than whatever we had polled at. But no, and I think the ultimate piece here, and part of what the case I've got to make over these next 5 weeks now is, great schools are where I think we start, but they're connected to safer and healthier neighborhoods. They're connected to jobs and economic opportunity, and they're connected to city government that works and works for the people and is customer friendly, and that all of these things connect together for Boston's future and how we will hopefully allow the city to reach new heights.
Well, and of course, though you ended up with, 16, 18%? 17%?
I think it was, actually 18% or 17 or 18. I can't, I honestly don't know.
The bottom line is, of course, that means that there were still 82%.
There's a lot of people who didn't vote for me.
And a lot more simply because the turnout wasn't that high. How do you bring them around? You know, certainly there were 65% that didn't vote for either you or Marty Walsh, your opponent. How do you bring them around? And there's, certain constituencies in particular, and a lot of people have focused lately, especially the minority community, the community of color, which is a sizable chunk, and the candidates of color, when you add up their totals, were pretty substantial. How do you reach out to those constituencies? How do you make that case? How do you bring them into your camp?
I just think we keep doing what we've been doing all along, which is to talk about our message and be out everywhere. And so really for me, it doesn't change a whole heck of a lot. I've been campaigning in every neighborhood. I have an organization in every neighborhood. My message is about what Boston can do when we work together, how we can transform our schools, how we can make our neighborhoods safe and healthy for everyone, how we can create jobs and economic opportunity for everyone. So that doesn't change, but I'll readily say, I think there's an element of this where you now make that case to voters who either didn't give you a look before or said, you know what, I like him, but he's not my first choice. And so, but we hope the work we've done before of meeting people and getting the message out there.
Be nice to everybody. You never know.
Yeah, right. Well, hey.
But what about some of the candidates? I'm thinking, John Barros, Charlotte Gola-Ritchie. Is there a place for them in the John Connolly administration, or is that too brazen to even talk about?
No, I think this field has a lot of talent, and I thought the great part of this preliminary campaign was it was positive and it was focused on ideas for Boston's future, and that came from all corners. And you start to name one, you're going to forget someone, but all 12 of us, I think, made this a great race through the preliminary. So I think there's a lot of talent there, and certainly I hope to win the support of
Will you get some of those endorsements, do you think?
I don't know. Let me tell you.
I'm guessing you were on the phone.
Right before I came in here. So, but yeah, no. Listen, I talked to my colleagues who ran all the time, texting, calling, that sort of thing. Love to have endorsements, but you know what? This campaign is not going to hinge on endorsements. They would help. They'd be great. But this campaign is going to continue to be about the message, transforming the schools, safe and healthy neighborhoods, better jobs, and economic opportunity, and we're going to put that message out to all of the voters, and we'll let them decide.
Well, and I know you've been talking about that for years, and I give you a lot of credit for that. You haven't given up, and it's a message you've carried. But a lot of people still don't really kind of have an understanding, and sometimes, and I know you prefer to talk about yourself and the positive things you hope to bring. But how do you differentiate yourself from your opponent? And I'm not looking for you to,
no, I mean, listen.
Help voters. Help them kind of understand what's the differences between the two of you.
Sure. I don't actually think that it's about that piece so much as it is just I'm going to talk about myself, and I'm going to talk about my vision for Boston. And Marty's a guy that I have a lot of respect for, and he's a friend of mine. I think he's going to do the same, and we'll just let the voters decide what the differences are. I think it's less about me saying these are the differences than if I talk about my message and Marty focuses on his, then hopefully voters will get a clear idea about us, and then they'll make up their mind. What I would say for me is my time as a teacher is an invaluable experience for me. I worked with students across every neighborhood of Boston, many of whom face the achievement gap and the opportunity divide. I have seen the transformative power of a great school for a young person. I'm a Boston Public School parent. And I know all the fears and joys that come with being a Boston Public School parent. And my daughter's in a school right now where they went from turnaround status and the brink of failure to being a level 1 school, or supposedly one of the best schools in the district. I've seen that formula that works for transforming our schools. I want to take that experience and my work on the council and bring it to bear in making our schools first. I want to take my experience as a city councilor at large, working with survivors of homicide, to talk about how we can have a better plan for safe and healthy neighborhoods. And I also want to talk about how we can bring ourselves together as a region to have a real economic development job creation plan. And that's what I hope is going to come out over the next few weeks for the voters.
And I give you a lot of credit for that. But a lot of people do focus on personal characteristics and background and so on and so forth. And of course, some people and some of them Walsh supporters want to cast this race as a working class guy up from the bootstraps, union guy versus Harvard Law, who had his parents. Very well educated, done well, and I'm playing a little devil's advocate here. But help them.
No, I got you. Listen, I first off, because I just don't want to have misrepresent my resume. I'm Harvard. I was Harvard College.
Oh, excuse me, Harvard College. My bad.
I wish I had been accepted to Harvard Law.
Boston College Law.
BC Law,
right?
Yeah.
Which is, in many people's eyes, just as good.
I love BC Law.
I was going to say,
no slight
just
on BC
as good.
Law. No slight on BC Law. Look, you know what, Joe? I'm proud of my education, and I think every parent cares deeply about education. I think everyone in the city does, because they know it's the key to our future. So, my parents worked hard to give me great educational opportunities, but, the pieces that were given to me in that were, my mother lost her dad as a young teenager and paid her way through college and law school, worked her way through, and taught me the value of hard work and the importance of education. My dad grew up in this city and worked incredibly hard to become an elected official. But when I think of my dad, it's not about this guy who grew up in West Roxbury and became a state rep, but and wasn't from the so-called political family. But it was the guy who did my math homework with me on Sundays, and the guy who coached my Pop Warner football team. I walked to Holy Name School, grew up in Roslindale, and had the best of what Boston had to offer, but always mindful that so many people in Boston didn't get the opportunities I had. It's why I went to the classroom and tried to give back as a teacher. It's why, as a city councilor, I've made schools the focus of my work, because I think education is the great equalizer and creates opportunity for everyone. And I hope people will look at me and look at my work and see my deep commitment to everyone in this city.
And so it doesn't do you justice, and those that want to cast it that way. What about those that want to cast Marty Walsh as this slave to labor and put it in those terms?
I think, look, I've known Marty for 15 years before I was ever in elected office. Marty Walsh is a great guy, and he's helped a lot of people. I don't have a bad word to say about Marty Walsh. I think he's a great guy, and he's done a lot of great things. And I think we're going to have a good debate about the future of Boston, and then let the voters decide.
Is that an issue, though? Your ability to kind of deal with unions. Of course, the arbitrators just came out with an award that, on the Boston Police Patrolmen's Union contract could cost the city $60, $80 million. Depends upon who you talk to, what you add in for other unions and so on and so forth. Is that something, is that a legitimate issue?
That's a very real issue. That's part of the mayor's job.
But the ability to deal
job.
with those unions?
I think voters have to look at that, and just, one thing I can say is the fiscal health of the city has to come first. We can't do anything in this city if we're not fiscally sound, and I've had the experience of balancing 6 budgets with working with the Menino administration, budgets that have made a big difference in Boston. I sat on the Ways and Means Committee and know how we craft a budget for the city, and understand the importance of the city reserves, understand the importance of the bond rating, understand the importance of how we borrow to fund the capital budget to get the construction projects done out there.
Can you say no to the unions if necessary?
Well, I think I've shown that with the teacher's contract for sure. And I think I was also, I know I was also part of a group of counselors who worked on that firefighter's contract.
Right, to train.
And we'll readily say Mike Ross was our leader on that. I don't want to take any thunder away from him on that, but I was part of the group that said we have to do better. And here, what I'm doing right now is I'm doing my job. I have sat down with the mayor's people to get a full understanding of the contract and its implications as it applies to the police. Right. I've sat down with the Patrolmen's Union just earlier today to get a full understanding of their take on the contract. I'm going to sleep on it overnight.
So no decision, because
No,
I know it does come to the council.
No, so I will make a decision soon, though. I will make a decision. You will hear from me this week on this. I want to be clear to the voters and the patrolmen and everyone in the city about where I stand on this. But I want to make sure I deliberate first and get a full understanding. So that will come soon.
Well, we've got just a couple minutes left, and I've got to ask you about this, because I know you've been talking about this, and I know you're very passionate about it, and that's closing the achievement gap.
Yep.
And but you know, I too have been following education. Of course, I've talked to had various superintendents on over the years, and a lot of people say, well, that's a great goal to have, but it's really, at the end of the day, it's not realistic. And the reason it's not realistic is because it involves factors that no one can control, not a mayor, and indeed, you know, even presidents, and that is poverty, and that's the biggest factor that fits into it. And you know, there's a lot of different parts to that. But so, are you being when you talk about it so much, are you maybe being a little, I won't say disingenuous, but are you being a little unrealistic to kind of hold that out there? And I'm giving you the little dig here.
Hey, Joe, I appreciate that.
Honestly, how would you do that? Do you know how much money that would cost?
Listen, I'm not going to surrender my my inner Robert Kennedy on any of this. Okay, I dream of a Boston that works for everyone and every child. That's part of why I love doing what I do. But let me just say this: we've seen the achievement gap closed. We've seen it closed at some of our charter schools in Boston. We've seen it closed at some of our Boston public schools at Boston. That's the academic piece, the achievement gap. The opportunity divide that comes at that delicate intersection of race and poverty in American cities is something we have to work much harder on. And that's economic opportunity, that's housing, that's environment, that's family, that's all of the pieces that we have to create a real wraparound and empowered community to help every child have an opportunity to succeed.
Costs a lot of money.
I don't think it has to when it comes to the school piece of it. That's about the fundamental way we build schools, whether it's from the bottom up and a focus on a good principle. On the other piece, yeah, it costs a lot of money, but you know what? The other end of the achievement gap and the opportunity divide is the school to prison pipeline. And that ends up costing everyone. And we also forget the human toll on that as well. When we lose that young person who had a bright future at one time or had that opportunity at one time. And that's why we've got to make the investments in early education. And it's but also why we have to have a real holistic effort. But let me say,
you won't be able to do that if you're paying for these police contracts, will you?
Well, I'll make up my mind on that too, but my school plans have never been about elevating costs. It's been about cutting the central department, taking the savings, investing it in schools, and then focus on developing great teachers and principals. That's what matters when you go into the classroom. This doesn't all have to be about exorbitant costs. Some of it's about just doing better for our children when it comes to the nuts and bolts.
We've got just a couple minutes left, and I've got to ask you about this, of course. As you look ahead down the campaign road, and sometimes you get distracted, obviously, by all the politics and all the things that the issues you feel passionately about. But do you see a path to victory here?
Yes.
Do you? And
I saw.
What is the single biggest key to that? And by announcing early, some people said, that you might have aggravated His Honor, the mayor. And do you see him playing a role as we head towards the final on this?
I think Tom Menino always plays a role because he's the mayor, and he has to make tough decisions every day as the leader of this city. And I said at the time that I decided to run, that while I was running, I deeply respected Mayor Menino. So I think he always is there because he's been so dedicated to the city, given his heart and his soul.
But he doesn't take challenges lightly either.
I've heard that. But I'll just say this. When I got in this on day one, I thought I could win. As we head toward the final election, I think I can win. And for me, it's all been about one simple thing. The message, what I stand for, and that's transforming our schools as the cornerstone, the foundation of our future, and how we connect that to safer neighborhoods and a better economy. And that's what I talked about on day one, and it's what I'm going to talk about on Election Day, November 5th, and we'll see what the people of Boston think. But I absolutely believe that they're going to respond to that message.
And if it conflicts with the way the mayor looks at things, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. You know, there's all these development projects that are all of a sudden being kind of pushed through. Will you have to shy away? Will you shy away from kind of pointing a finger at that?
I'll always speak my mind. I think I've done that as a councilor for 6 years. I think I've spoken my mind during this campaign. And I think that there's one thing people don't doubt about me. It's that I will say what I think, and I will say what I believe is right. I'll also say I think Tom Menino has given his heart and his soul to this city, done a great job for 20 years. And what I've seen in the past few months is he put a great housing plan on the table. It's a blueprint for the next mayor. You don't take all of it, but I think there's pieces in there that are vital to how we create middle market housing, how we can connect that to more affordable housing. And I think, again, on the budget piece, maybe the piece I'm most thankful for on that, I haven't always agreed with Mayor Menino, but one great piece for me was sitting on the Ways and Means Committee, balancing 6 budgets with the Menino administration. I learned an awful lot about how you craft a budget from Mayor Menino and his administration.
So take the best, leave the rest.
That, I like. Can I take that?
You know it. Again, City Councilor at Large John Connolly, hoping to be Mayor John Connolly, and of course just passed the prelim, finished second, made the runoff, and tonight here on Talk to the Neighborhood, talking about his hopes as he heads towards the final. John, I want to congratulate you again on a great campaign and wish you the best of luck in the weeks ahead. And
thanks so much.
Come what may.
I appreciate it.
I should mention, in an upcoming program next week, as a matter of fact, Representative Marty Walsh, the other finalist, the top voter in the prelim, will be joining us. Stay tuned. When we come back, Joyce Ferriabough, my favorite, one of my favorite political activists in the city, will join us to talk about what's next for the African American community and which direction do they go as they look to maximize the gains that were made in the prelim. Join us for that. More of Talking to the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, all politics as a normal want, and after last Tuesday's preliminary election, much to talk about, not the least of which is the candidates who didn't make it to the final. Of course, John Connolly was here earlier. Marty Walsh will be on next week, but it's a very strong field, some great candidates that didn't make it, including some from the community of color that many people thought would in this election year. Joining me in this segment to talk about that a little bit, one of my favorite all-time guests on Talk to the Neighborhoods, a prominent African-American political activist, and she was the press person, a communications person for the Charlotte Gola Ritchie campaign. I'm talking, of course, about Joyce Ferriabough. And Joyce, nice to have you here, as always.
Great,
nice
always, wonderful.
Well, you know, there's a lot of hoopla around, you know, of course, the winners. Everybody wants to talk about that. But there was also a lot of post-election criticism and analysis, and I think it's fair to say disappointment, certainly in some ranks, because the feeling was that this was the year when, and many people would say we could finally see a person of color become mayor, or at least have an opportunity to, since Mel King 30 years ago. Is that too strong? Disappointment? Wrong word?
Well, I guess I have to tell you that I was disappointed by the turnout. I mean, only 30% of the registered voters came out to vote in an election this important. There hadn't been one. So that's what stunned me, first of all. With my candidate, I think that there was quite a bit of unfairness, actually, to make a long story short. I'd like to start first with the fact that the coalescing around one candidate, because I'd like the audience to understand what that means. It's like purely political numbers. If the communities of color came out consistently, like the communities of West Roxbury come out, then you wouldn't be talking about galvanizing around one
Right,
candidate.
yeah.
So let's be realistic about that.
So that was the where much of that started as well. And
Well, yes, because the idea of coalescing around one candidate was a numerical, a smart move because of that, because there is no consistency around how communities of color come out. Let's be for real about that. 20 years ago, my husband ran for mayor of the
Bruce Bowen,
city
yeah.
against Menino. And, you know, you could take a tear out of his playbook and see the same identical thing that happened to him. He got the majority of the votes of people of color, as Charlotte did, but not enough came out to make a difference, okay? Now, you can talk about inspiring. You can talk about whether people, want to vote. You could talk about, lethargy, any of that. But the fact of the matter is, bottom line is, not enough of our folks came out to vote. Not enough came out to vote at all. Added to that, I think was some just kind of unfair play.
how so?
Well, the woman didn't have a message. Please, she started from nothing. She's within striking distance of the second person
Right.
who's on the ballot now, beats the guy with the biggest bank, Connolly,
Right.
and yet she has no message. That in and of itself doesn't make sense. Maybe her message wasn't as fine-tuned as you would like it to be. The second thing is, to really be honest, and I'll quote Jim Browdy, I know he's your competitor on another
That's all
station,
right.
when he
Good guy.
said, quote unquote, on Friday, wow, the Globe eviscerated the candidate. I don't know where that came from. I can say the same thing happened to my husband in a lot of ways. But 4 days before the election, a columnist comes out with something like that. It's beyond belief that somebody would do something like that. So that was not correct. And I have to also say that, the fact that, folks were saying, well, putting it around one person, it lacks democracy. Come on, give me a break.
But did that kind of, and it was kind of interesting how that story played out. And for our
Sure.
viewers that aren't following along, there was at one point a meeting of various parties and supporters from various candidates where there was a discussion about trying to coalesce around one candidate of color. And it seemed to kind of backfire, though.
Well, let me just...
and maybe that was just the perception, but...
Yeah, it did. Let me just say that, first of all, the candidate knew nothing about it, okay? Sometimes, these guys think that they know strategy
Right.
better than you, but I just think that had anybody known about it, we would have said, look, this is the kind
Leave it
of...
be.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
But, it did open a fissure, because before then, as you and other people had communicated to me, we had wonderful press. I mean, people got to know her better, and that was our point, to get people to know her, because as you know, she started out with a zero rate of people knowing her.
Right.
And
Zero bank account.
Thank you. And so the getting her out there was very intentional, but that particular piece opened a fissure where folks felt that they could, take some shots, and that's how it is in in political races. You open yourself up, you get
Right.
a shot.
And
But
you don't
I
win
thought it
them
was
all.
unfair.
There was a very interesting op-ed piece in the Boston Herald by Reverend Eugene Rivers, who I know was a supporter of. Now he's never been afraid to kind of pull a punch, as anybody that's followed Gene Rivers
Sure.
knows. But he was sharply critical of the community of color for kind of failing to recognize the political reality of how these races are won and lost. At the end of the day, I won't say no one cares what you think, but you count the votes. And if you don't have more than
That's
the
right.
next person, then well, I don't. I won't say it doesn't matter what you think,
No,
but
no.
a lot of that gets lost.
Well, I think a little bit over the top, but that's Eugene, a little over the top. I think that for those who came out in our community, they came out at great numbers. Ward 12, Ward 14, off the hook. Ward 18 did better than some parts of West Roxbury and South Boston. Not enough came out.
Right.
That's the bottom.
Only 30%
Thank you.
citywide in total.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So to the extent.
So your that pie is getting smaller
And smaller,
Yeah.
okay. And so, and to come to find out that the Reverend hasn't voted in so many years and did not vote for the person he supported, I think was, rather ironic. I don't think that it takes away from the fact that he has done great service here with the youth of our city.
Not afraid to tell it like it is.
Not afraid to tell it like it is.
Yeah.
I just think that, it just, the message, however, should not get lost. And that is, this community of color, African American, sometimes that gets all diluted with the communities of color and, the cultural piece. And I think that we do have to build stronger civic engagement than we've shown in the past. Because
Well, and I think, and not to interrupt you, but I think there had been, and I think the thought was actually when you saw the turnout, well, naturally, presidential race, you're going to have something, but the turnout was incredible, and I know you and others have had a lot to do with that. The thought was,
that it would go to the
practice makes perfect. Here's your chance.
But I think it's kind of
or were they distracted by, because there were other, Charlotte was an excellent candidate, but there were other great candidates of color.
That's true.
And other great candidates as well.
Well, I'm not sure that I have a handle on why municipal races get just lesser attachment, lesser view than Senate races, special election races for Congress, presidential races. I've not, because the municipal races are the races that are closest to the people, and I'm just,
and in some ways should count most.
Absolutely. So that's the reason why I'm still in a little quandary about that. But again, I think that Charlotte should hold her head up high. No one ever thought she'd come as far as she did. On election night, she
I
says,
think there were a lot of people very afraid of her candidacy. She was the one candidate that could, kind of come out of nowhere. And in fact, she did. She made great progress.
She came in a strong third, beating the guy with the biggest bank. And I think it was a matter of 3,000 votes. So in a way, that has to be a little bit of a heartbreaker. But I think that she's not gotten the credit that she's done. And I know to the victor belongs the spoils. But, this is the United States where, when one pulls themselves up from their bootstraps, you get a kind of, but again, I think that as I articulated, there were just some instances that were very, very wrong.
Right, and didn't hold true. Well, yeah, and I want to ask you about this, because we've talked about this before when you've been here, and that's a whole notion that we're, in this kind of post-racial society, and
no such thing.
And race and ethnicity and gender shouldn't count as much as more, or that they don't count as much anymore for, I won't land solely on their doorstep, but especially younger people who are, kind of inured with multiculturalism and don't see it as clearly.
Well, you know what? Here's what I say, and maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I feel like, I'm African American first. Now you can look at me and see that I'm mixed with other things, maybe. So I'm I'm multicultural, but I'm African American first. And I think that there are cultural differences between the African American community, the Cape Verdean community, the Hispanic communities, and I say that each of those communities still need to have their own self-identity and build their own, structures. Now, I want my son to live and understand a multicultural community, but I want him to know he's African American first. And I think that, maybe that's a little bit myopic in this so-called post-racial world where they're getting ready to pull the plug on the budget here because there's a black president. But I still feel that you have to have your own self-identity. And this stuff about watering down identity politics, it doesn't fly with me. And as a woman, I also understand there's another dynamic in terms of empowerment for women. And so I think that while you can be a person who understands and works with all cultures, I think who you are should be first and foremost in how you work in this world. I don't believe in the total watering down of your identity. Right. We still have work to do.
Do you think, though, that was a factor? As much as that comes into play, race, but gender as well. And some people thought that because Charlotte was the only woman in the race, that there was an opportunity there in addition to, her, race, ethnicity.
Well, I mean, I can tell you as a person who's helped many first women of color,
right,
that it isn't easy as you think it is having to deal with gender and race, okay?
In some ways, maybe it complicates it.
It absolutely complicates things because, it's like, let's take Hillary Clinton. How come she's wearing the pantsuit? Why did she do her hair? Why did she cry? All of those things that you never hear them, I didn't hear anybody on the candidates have a clear message, but the message piece was like, she doesn't have a clear message. So there were some distinctions that we had to deal with, with her as a woman that you wouldn't have to deal with a man. I know I worked in Bruce's campaign. We didn't have to deal with those dynamics with him. So you're right, it makes it more complicated to navigate. I think that, as Charlotte mentioned, she has opened up the door, and so someone else needs to, kind of go through the door. And so she doesn't have anything to be ashamed of,
no.
But, there were a couple of things that were hideous.
Do you think she was surprised at the, and I'm hoping she comes in, kind of the intensity, the unpredictability of the race as it turned out? I mean, it was very close. Everybody was within the margin of error.
I know.
It was anybody's guess. Lots of times, media is the biggest culprit of this. They shape the field by polls and stuff. There were very few polls, and so even people moving from one candidate to another, like, I don't think my candidate's going to win, therefore I'm going to vote for so-and-so. I don't think that happened. I think people stuck with their candidates.
I think they stuck with their candidate. I just, to be honest with you, I think there were too many to choose from and not really enough distinction among all of the candidates. Clearly,
and maybe that's the media's fault, too.
Right. Well, with Charlotte, it was always not enough money, not message, but she kept zooming in the polls. She doubled herself from 5 to 10, then she moved up to, in the end, to 13. So it was clear that she was rising, and so there were, some things at play. The campaign, maybe, I would agree to that. But I think that certain institutions feel that they need to shape who our leaders are. I think that people in this community see right through it. But I think that, it's wrong. When you say...
A lot of people thought she'd get the Globe endorsement. They were surprised.
Well, that's what Jim Bowdy said. He said, boy, if there was anybody tailor-made for... And I'm not sure about that myself. what
How
happened
much it
there.
helps or hurts. But,
Yeah, well, in our community, I mean, we read the Herald.
Yeah.
Sorry, Globe, but we do read the Herald. But I'm sure that having lost the Globe endorsement, she lost a few liberal voters who probably went to John Barrows. But, I mean, a lot of people look at it as they chose the weakest person of color to ensure that, their real pick got it.
And there were, 2 or 3 candidates that had a small showing, but if those had been added to one candidate or another, pick whatever candidate
Absolutely,
you wanted.
the 2 Charleses I'll pick. Okay,
well,
if we had gotten their votes.
So you can only, kind of look in the mirror. At least they can, if it depends upon how much of a priority it was for them. All right, what's next?
Ego.
What's next for Charlotte Goler Ritchie?
Well, I don't.
She's a proud woman, and
Absolutely,
she's a terrific,
very accomplished woman.
Yeah.
I think that
That'd
the
be,
run for mayor hasn't defined where she goes from here. I'm sure the other 2 candidates are courting her, and because you can sort of count 2 or 3 of them all together, and she still got more vote. I think she did she had a terrific showing, and I think that she'll be courted, and I think that she will be a player in terms of what she would like to see, and the message will be loud and clear on that in terms of what she would like to see.
What do you think? I mean, because you know her so well. I mean, what kinds of things will you think will be important to her?
Well, I think public safety. I mean, she lives in an area that is besieged by criminal activity. She was very adamant that not only do there needs to be more diversity in terms of race, but in terms of gender in the police department. I think that, I'm thinking that she will want to see a plan to make that happen within the police force now, and not just going by test. I think that she's going to want to see a real plan on community policing for those areas that both she and I live in, which, are war zones. With all due respect to the police commissioner, I'm sort of happy he's moving on, because that gives us an opportunity to get someone in there who has a vision for this. I mean, he's been there for 8 years and nothing has ever changed on that. So I think that, if I'm her and I'm, she speaks her own mind, that's one of the things.
And we're hoping she'll come in at some point and come back.
She loves it. That will be a priority. Because, I think there are about 139 of our young people, dead by homicide, gun violence, and it keeps going on and on.
Horrific.
And people outside of the community, my friends in Brookline, and they'll say, geez, Joyce, how does that be allowed to happen?
Right.
Why? Because you don't have people of color in there who can tell you what's what.
And what about her perhaps joining the administration of the next mayor? You think that's something she could send? And put it in this context, because really these 2 guys didn't earn 65% of the
That's true.
of only 30% of the city's voters.
That's right.
The biggest, it would seem that the given the population, areas that no longer have a candidate from there, especially the community of color would have a big say in who's going to be the next mayor. I mean, there's the plus side, if there's anything to be said to this.
Absolutely, and I do think that Charlotte will play a major role on working with whichever candidate. And I noticed that right after the day after the election was over, the Globe did a piece in which they talked about how different people could be in the administration. Of course, they skipped over Charlotte Ritchie, who was the housing chief, who did the most to change housing in the city. I think that she could be, I'd like to see her head of BRA. I think that she'd be stupendous in that department, or chief of housing where she was. But I think, you know, she's on everybody's radar screen.
Certainly, and so is Joyce Ferriabough, my friend and guest in this segment, talking about some of the fallout and looking ahead from last week's preliminary election. Of course, the two finalists in the mayor's race, John Connolly here earlier, Marty Walsh will be here next week. Very strong field, and included among them Charlotte's Gola Ritchie, who finished third. And Joyce, as always,
Thank you.
Love having you here talking.
Thank you.
You tell it like it is, and there's nothing better in my mind.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for coming in.
All right, Joe.
All right. You're watching Talking the Neighborhoods here on the Boston Neighborhood Network. We're here tonight and every Monday night at this same time. We'll be back next week. As I said earlier, my guest, Representative Martin Walsh. Until then, for the entire staff and crew here at BNN TV, I want to thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.